Sir, I'm asking you one last time to lower your voice. The flight attendant's words trembled in the still air of the first-class cabin, not because she lacked authority, but because the man standing in the aisle had already decided authority did not apply to him. Daniel Carter did not sit down. He stood there in the narrow aisle of Atlantic Crown Flight 882, one hand gripping the leather headrest of Seat 1B, his jaw tight, breath slow, eyes fixed on the woman sitting beside his assigned seat, like she had committed some invisible crime simply by existing. Around them, the cabin had gone quiet. The quiet that comes when people realize something ugly is unfolding, and no one is sure how far it will go. A glass of champagne trembled slightly on a tray. The ice inside clicked once against the crystal. A man in seat 2. A slowly lowered his newspaper. A woman across the aisle stopped mid-sentence while whispering to her husband. Phones began to appear. Daniel Carter did not notice, or maybe he did, and simply did not care. "Sir," the flight attendant tried again, softer this time. "We need to prepare the cabin for departure." Daniel finally looked at her. 52 years old, tall, silver at the temples, a tan that came from winters in Miami and summers in East Hampton. His navy Savile Row suit fit like armor. Everything about him radiated money, confidence, control. The kind of man who had spent decades being told yes before he even finished asking the question. His voice came out low, cold. "Then move her." His finger pointed directly at the woman sitting calmly into seat 1B. She had not moved since he arrived, not when he cleared his throat loudly, not when he placed his expensive carry-on down with deliberate force, not even when he began talking as though she were not a person, but a problem to be solved. She simply turned one page of the document, resting on the tray table in front of her. The sound was soft. Paper sliding over paper. Daniel's jaw tightened. The narrator of this moment could see something Daniel could not. This was the exact moment his life began to fracture. But Daniel Carter had never learned how to recognize warning signs, because for most of his life, he had been the warning sign. The cabin lights glowed warm against polished chrome. Outside the oval windows, the runway shimmered under evening floodlights. Baggage carts rolled slowly across the tarmac like silent beetles. Inside first class, wealth had gathered. Private equity partners, a retired senator, a Hollywood actress hiding beneath oversized sunglasses. People who were used to comfort, but also used to watching. And they were watching now, watching Daniel Carter and the woman beside his seat, the woman who had not yet raised her voice. Her name was Dr. Alicia Bennett, 48 years old. Her posture was effortless, back straight but relaxed, shoulders still. She wore a cream-colored cashmere blazer over a simple silk blouse. No flashy jewelry. Just a thin gold watch resting lightly against her wrist. Her hair was braided and gathered neatly at the back of her head. Her presence carried the quiet gravity of someone who had spent a lifetime walking into rooms full of powerful men and never once asking permission to be there. But Daniel Carter had already made his judgment, and judgments, once formed in men like him, rarely changed. He leaned forward slightly. "You're in my space." Dr. Bennet slowly lifted her eyes over the rim of her reading glasses. They were dark, focused, observant, not angry, just measuring. "I'm in my seat," she said calmly. Her voice carried the faintest blend of New York cadence and something older, academic, precise. Daniel gave a small, humorless laugh. "I specifically booked 1A because I require privacy." He gestured vaguely toward her documents. "I conduct sensitive business." His words hung in the air. Then he added quietly, "And I don't know who you are." Dr. Bennet looked at him for another second. The narrator could see something flicker behind her gaze. Not fear. Not even annoyance. Recognition. The kind that comes when someone realizes exactly what kind of man they are dealing with. She closed the folder gently. The sound echoed far louder than it should have in the hushed cabin. "My name," she said evenly, "is Dr. Alicia Bennet, and I paid full fare for this seat." Daniel's nostrils flared slightly. That answer had not satisfied him. Because the problem was not the ticket. The problem was her. "You people always say that," he muttered. A few heads turned. The actress in row 2 slowly lowered her sunglasses. The flight attendant froze. Dr. Bennet did not react immediately. She simply looked at him. "You people?" she repeated. Daniel shrugged, a casual gesture. Careless. The kind of carelessness that only comes from a lifetime of never suffering consequences. "I'm saying," he continued, voice lowering into something sharper, "the airline seems to hand out upgrades very generously these days." The sentence landed in the cabin like a stone dropped into water. Ripples of silence moved outward. No one spoke, but everyone heard. Dr. Bennet held his gaze. The narrator could feel the shift in the air, a quiet tightening, the moment when a situation stops being awkward and begins becoming dangerous. The flight attendant swallowed. "Mr. Carter," she said carefully, "perhaps you could take your seat and we can—" Daniel didn't look at her. "I'm not sitting next to someone who clearly does not belong in this cabin." The words were quiet, but they carried, like a crack through glass. A man 2 rows back began recording openly now. Across the aisle, an older couple exchanged uncomfortable glances. Dr. Bennet slowly removed her glasses, folded them with precise movements. Then she stood. Not dramatically, not aggressively, just calmly rising to her full height. She was not tall, but suddenly the narrow aisle felt too small to contain the moment. "Mr. Carter," she said. Her voice did not rise, but the authority inside it sharpened the air. "You are creating a disturbance on a commercial aircraft." Daniel smirked. "Oh, please." But the narrator could see something he could not. A slow chain of events already in motion. Invisible threads tightening. Somewhere inside the cockpit, a pilot glanced at the cabin monitor. Somewhere inside a corporate office miles away, a phone would soon ring. And somewhere inside Daniel Carter's carefully constructed empire, the first cracks had already begun to spread. Dr. Bennet turned toward the front galley. Her voice carried just enough for the crew to hear. "I believe it may be necessary," she said quietly, "to ask Captain Reynolds to step out here." The name hit the air like a distant thunderclap. Daniel frowned. "How do you know the captain's name?" Dr. Bennett looked back at him. For the first time, something colder appeared in her eyes. Not anger, not revenge. Something far more dangerous. Certainty. "Because," she said calmly, "I signed his certification renewal last month." Daniel Carter blinked once, slow and deliberate, as if the words had arrived in a language his mind refused to translate. Around him, the quiet in the cabin deepened. Not the polite silence of wealthy travelers waiting for boarding to finish. This silence had weight, the kind that presses on the chest, the kind that makes people stop breathing for a moment. The flight attendant standing near the galley froze completely. Her name was Emily Harper, 32 years old, 6 years into the job, trained to keep passengers calm no matter what chaos unfolded 30,000 feet in the air. But right now her training did nothing for the chill sliding up her spine. Signed his certification renewal. She knew exactly what that meant. And judging by the look on Mark Sullivan's face across the galley, so did he. Daniel Carter did not. He let out a short laugh, sharp and dismissive. "That's funny," he said, leaning slightly closer. "That's actually very funny." His smile did not reach his eyes. The narrator of this moment could see the mechanism inside Daniel Carter's mind, working rapidly now, searching for a way to reassert control. Men like him did not surrender ground easily. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice again, trying to make it sound reasonable now, almost patient. "I don't know what game you think you're playing, but I have a schedule tonight. I have investors waiting in London. I do not have time for whatever this is." Dr. Alicia Bennett said nothing. She simply watched him. Behind Daniel, a passenger in row 2 quietly whispered to the man beside him. "Did she just say, certification renewal?" The man shook his head slowly, eyes never leaving the aisle. "I think she did." Across the cabin, someone's phone camera shifted angle. The soft click of the lens adjusting sounded unnaturally loud. Daniel heard it. His shoulders stiffened. He hated cameras when they were not on his terms. He turned halfway, scanning the cabin. "Put that away," he snapped toward the passenger filming. The man did not move. Daniel's jaw flexed. Then he turned back to Alicia Bennett. "You're delaying this flight." Her answer came without a hint of hesitation. "No," she said quietly. "You are." The words landed clean, precise. Daniel opened his mouth again, but before he could speak, the cockpit door opened. The sound of the latch releasing echoed like a small metallic crack in the still air. Captain David Reynolds stepped out. 54 years old, broad shoulders, calm eyes, 4 gold stripes on each sleeve. A man responsible for the lives of more than 200 passengers every time he closed the cockpit door. His expression carried mild irritation at first. A flight delayed on the ground meant missed departure windows, paperwork, phone calls to operations. But that irritation lasted exactly 1 second. Because the moment his eyes landed on the woman standing beside seat 1B, the irritation vanished, replaced instantly by recognition. "Dr. Bennett?" The change in his voice was subtle, but unmistakable. A ripple moved through the cabin. Daniel Carter frowned. Captain Reynolds took 2 steps forward. "Alicia," he said, the tension draining from his shoulders in surprise. "I had no idea you were on this flight." Dr. Bennett gave him a small, polite smile. "Good evening, David." The familiarity between them was quiet but undeniable. Daniel's eyes moved rapidly from one to the other. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. Captain Reynolds finally looked at him. The calm professionalism returned to his face immediately. "Sir, is there a problem?" Daniel stepped forward, eager to regain the narrative. "Yes," he said quickly, "there is. This passenger is refusing to move seats after I explained that I require privacy for business communications." Captain Reynolds glanced at Alicia. She did not interrupt. She did not defend herself. She simply waited. That alone made the captain's brow tighten slightly. "Dr. Bennett," he said carefully, "is that accurate?" Her response was measured. "No." Daniel scoffed loudly. "That's ridiculous." But the captain raised one hand, a quiet signal for silence. The narrator could feel the energy in the cabin shifting again. Passengers leaned slightly closer now. The story was changing direction, and Daniel Carter was the only one who had not noticed. Alicia Bennett folded her hands lightly in front of her. "Captain Reynolds," she said calmly, "this passenger has used racially discriminatory language toward me and refused multiple requests from your crew to return to his seat." Daniel's head snapped toward her. "That is not what happened." Emily Harper felt her pulse quicken, because she had heard every word, and she knew exactly how this looked. Captain Reynolds turned back to Daniel. "Sir, did you say anything that could be interpreted that way?" Daniel laughed again, louder this time. "Oh, come on." His voice rose. "This is exactly the problem with this country right now." The sentence hung unfinished. Dangerous. Mark Sullivan felt the back of his neck tighten. He had seen confrontations escalate before. But this felt different, because the woman standing calmly in the aisle did not look like someone who needed protection. She looked like someone waiting for the moment a man revealed exactly who he was. Daniel continued. "All I said was that first class exists for a reason. People pay for an environment." He spread his hands slightly. "And frankly, she doesn't fit that environment." A quiet gasp came from somewhere behind them. Captain Reynolds inhaled slowly through his nose. The narrator could see it now, the precise moment the pilot's patience ended. "Mr. Carter," he said carefully, "I'm going to ask you to take your seat." Daniel did not move. Instead, he looked directly at Alicia Bennett again. "I want her removed." 3 words. Heavy. Final. Captain Reynolds stared at him for several seconds. Then he turned slowly toward Alicia. "Doctor," he said quietly, "would you like to explain the certification renewal comment?" For the first time, Alicia Bennett glanced briefly toward the cockpit, then back at the captain. "Yes," she said simply. Her voice carried effortlessly across the silent cabin. "I chair the International Aviation Oversight Board." The words dropped like a stone into deep water. The effect was immediate. Emily Harper felt the air leave her lungs. Mark Sullivan closed his eyes for half a second. And in seat 1A, Daniel Carter's confident smile finally began to crack. Daniel Carter stared at her. For a moment his face remained perfectly still, the way a man's face freezes when the brain refuses to process what it has just heard. Then the corner of his mouth twitched. Not fear. Not yet. Just disbelief. The International Aviation Oversight Board, he repeated slowly, like someone tasting a strange word. A passenger 2 rows back whispered under his breath, "You've got to be kidding." Another voice answered quietly, "No one jokes about that." Daniel shook his head and let out a laugh that sounded slightly thinner than before. "That's adorable," he said. He turned toward Captain Reynolds, expecting the pilot to join him in dismissing the absurd claim. But Reynolds wasn't smiling. He wasn't even looking at Daniel. His eyes were fixed on Dr. Alicia Bennett. The pilot's posture had changed, subtle, but unmistakable. The relaxed stance of a man managing a minor passenger dispute had disappeared. Now he stood straight, shoulders squared, chin slightly lifted. The posture of someone addressing a superior. "Doctor," he said carefully, "I didn't realize you were traveling tonight." The confirmation moved through the cabin like electricity. Not loud, not dramatic, just the quiet, collective realization spreading through 24 very attentive minds. The woman beside Daniel Carter was not bluffing. The man filming in seat 2. He slowly lowered his phone halfway, stunned. The actress across the aisle leaned forward in her seat, sunglasses forgotten in her hand. Daniel saw it all. The shifting glances, the sudden caution in the captain's voice, and for the first time, a small thread of unease slid through his chest. But men like Daniel Carter did not retreat when unease appeared. They attacked it. "Well," he said sharply, straightening his jacket. "That's great. Wonderful. Fantastic credentials. But none of that changes the fact that she's interfering with my ability to conduct business on this flight." His voice grew louder, reclaiming space. "I paid $15,000 for this seat." The number hung in the air like a challenge. "I am a Platinum Legacy member of this airline. I have flown with Atlantic Crown more than 40 times in the past year alone." His eyes swept across the crew. "So I suggest we stop pretending this is a courtroom and solve the problem." Captain Reynolds turned slowly toward him. "Sir," he said quietly, "the problem appears to be your behavior." Daniel blinked. For a split second, the mask cracked. No one had spoken to him like that in years. Not employees, not bankers, not senators whose campaigns he had quietly funded. The narrator could see something shifting inside Daniel now. Pride hardening. Ego bracing. "You're making a mistake," Daniel said, voice tightening. Dr. Bennett had not moved. She watched the exchange like a scientist observing a reaction inside glass. Then she spoke. "Mr. Carter, you've used racially discriminatory language toward me in front of multiple witnesses. You have ignored instructions from the cabin crew and escalated a disturbance on a commercial aircraft preparing for departure." Her tone was even. "Clinical. You are now interfering with flight operations." Daniel turned sharply toward her. "You're twisting my words." "No," she replied calmly. "I'm documenting them." A ripple of murmurs moved through the cabin. The man in seat 2 lifted his phone again. Daniel noticed. His temper snapped. "Stop recording me!" he barked. The passenger didn't lower the phone this time. Captain Reynolds stepped slightly closer. "Mr. Carter, you need to lower your voice." Daniel swung back toward him. "Or what?" The question came out sharp, reckless. A dangerous question. Because it demanded an answer. Captain Reynolds's eyes hardened. Or you will be removed from this aircraft. The sentence dropped into the aisle like a hammer. The cabin froze. Even the distant hum of the ground power unit outside seemed to fade. Daniel stared at him. You can't remove me. The pilot did not blink. Yes, he said quietly. I can. Daniel laughed again. But now the laugh had an edge. Oh, please, do you have any idea who I am? There it was. The oldest weapon in Daniel Carter's arsenal. Identity as leverage. Power as intimidation. I run Carter Capital, he continued. We manage over $4 billion in assets. I personally know the CEO of this airline. He pointed a finger toward the cockpit. And if you think grounding me over some misunderstanding is a good career decision, you're out of your mind. Captain Reynolds said nothing. Dr. Bennett tilted her head slightly. You know Arthur Pendleton? She asked. Daniel turned toward her immediately. Yes, he snapped. Arthur and I attend the same charity events. I have his direct number. Alicia Bennett nodded slowly. That's interesting. The narrator could feel the atmosphere tightening again, the tempo rising, because the woman standing calmly in the aisle had just recognized the exact path Daniel Carter was about to take, and she allowed it. Daniel pulled his phone from his pocket, a sleek black device. Expensive, polished. You know what? He said, tapping the screen. Let's solve this right now. His thumb pressed the contact. Arthur Pendleton, the CEO of Atlantic Crown Airlines. Passengers leaned closer, phones lifted higher. Daniel pressed call and raised the phone to his ear. The ringtone echoed faintly. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. Dr. Bennett watched him without expression. Then she reached quietly into her handbag. The movement was almost invisible. But Mark Sullivan saw it, and his pulse jumped. Because the phone she removed was not an ordinary phone. It was a satellite handset. Matte black, industrial, the kind used by government officials and international regulators. Daniel was too busy speaking. Arthur, he said loudly into the phone as the call finally connected. The cabin could hear every word. It's Daniel Carter. I'm on your London flight right now, and your staff is completely out of control. The pilot is threatening to remove me because some woman in first class is claiming she works for Aviation oversight. He turned slightly so everyone could hear. I need you to fix this immediately. Across the aisle, Alicia Bennett calmly dialed a number on the satellite phone. Daniel continued talking. Yes, I'm serious. He's standing right here. The satellite phone clicked. A voice answered. Clear. Direct. Pendleton. Alicia Bennett lifted the phone to her ear. Arthur, she said softly. It's Alicia. The effect was immediate. Daniel's voice stopped mid-sentence. Slowly, very slowly. His head turned toward her. And for the first time that night, Daniel Carter looked uncertain. Daniel Carter felt the words hit the air before his mind understood them. Arthur. Alicia. The names collided in the quiet cabin like 2 trains moving toward each other on the same track. He slowly lowered his phone from his ear. For a moment, no one spoke. The engines outside the aircraft hummed softly, a distant mechanical heartbeat. Somewhere farther down the cabin, a glass shifted on a tray with a faint clink. Dr. Alicia Bennett held the satellite phone lightly against her ear, posture calm, voice even. "Yes," she said. "I'm on Atlantic Crown Flight 882. We haven't departed yet." A pause. Her gaze drifted briefly toward Daniel Carter. Another pause. Then she continued. "Yes. The passenger's name is Daniel Carter." Across the aisle, a man quietly whispered, "Oh my God." Daniel's stomach tightened. Not fear. Not yet. But something unfamiliar had entered the room. Loss of control. He lifted his phone again, speaking quickly into it. "Arthur, are you still there?" The voice on the other end of his phone answered, distant and confused. "Yes, Daniel, I'm here." "What's going on?" "I'm getting another call." Daniel laughed awkwardly. "Yeah, that's probably some misunderstanding happening here. Look, your crew is being ridiculous. There's a woman here claiming—" He stopped, because he heard it, through the small speaker of his phone. Arthur Pendleton's voice, on the other line, speaking to Alicia Bennett, clear as day. "Yes, Dr. Bennett," the CEO said. "I'm listening." Daniel Carter's hand slowly lowered. The cabin air seemed to compress around him. Alicia continued speaking into the satellite phone. "Yes, there has been a disturbance in first class. A passenger has repeatedly used racially discriminatory language and is refusing to comply with crew instructions." Captain Reynolds stood perfectly still beside them. His jaw had tightened, but he said nothing. A CEO's call outranked the entire cabin. Daniel's mouth opened slightly. "This is insane," he muttered. No one responded. Phones were now openly recording. Every face in first class watched him. The actress in seat 2B leaned forward so far, her elbows touched her knees. Daniel Carter, the man who had entered the aircraft like he owned the sky, now stood frozen in the aisle. Alicia Bennett listened quietly to the voice on the other end. Then she said something that made Daniel's pulse spike. "Yes. He says he knows you personally." She paused, then added calmly, "He also asked the captain to remove me from the aircraft." Another pause. This one longer. Daniel could hear Arthur Pendleton's voice again, faintly through the satellite phone. The tone had changed. Lower, sharper. Alicia nodded once. "Yes, Arthur. He's standing right here." She turned slightly and held the satellite phone out. "Toward Daniel. It's for you." The gesture was small, but the weight of it filled the cabin. Daniel stared at the phone like it might explode. "Arthur?" he asked cautiously. "Yes," Alicia replied. "He would like to speak with you." For a long moment, Daniel didn't move. The narrator could see his mind racing now, trying to regain its footing, trying to find a version of events where he still held the upper hand. He reached out slowly and took the phone. It felt heavier than he expected. He lifted it to his ear. "Arthur?" The reply came instantly. But it wasn't the friendly voice Daniel remembered from cocktail parties and charity galas. It was cold, controlled. "Mr. Carter." Daniel swallowed. "Yes, Arthur." "Listen. This whole situation—" Stop, one word, sharp enough to cut. The entire cabin seemed to lean closer. Daniel blinked. "Excuse me?" Arthur Pendleton's voice dropped lower. "You are currently on a speakerphone with the chair of the International Aviation Oversight Board." Daniel felt heat rise up his neck. Arthur continued. "And according to what I'm hearing, you have just verbally assaulted her on one of my aircraft." Daniel's eyes flicked toward Alicia Bennett. She stood quietly beside the aisle seat. No anger, no triumph, just calm observation. "She's exaggerating," Daniel said quickly. "Arthur, you know me. I would never—" "Mr. Carter." Arthur's voice cracked through the phone like a gavel. "Do not interrupt me again." Daniel froze. Arthur went on. "Dr. Bennett oversees safety certification for every major commercial airline operating across the Atlantic corridor." The words fell slowly, deliberately. "She has the authority to suspend our landing permissions in London, Frankfurt, and Paris pending safety review." Daniel's pulse thudded in his ears. Arthur continued. "If she makes that call, my company loses hundreds of millions of dollars in international routes overnight." The man in seat 2A whispered under his breath. Holy hell. Daniel felt sweat forming at the base of his neck. Arthur's voice sharpened further. "And right now, Daniel, you are standing in the aisle of one of my aircraft, insulting the single most powerful aviation regulator in the Western Hemisphere." Daniel's mouth went dry. "I didn't know," he said weakly. Arthur laughed. But there was no humor in it. "That's not the defense you think it is." Silence followed. Then Arthur delivered the final blow. "You are to hand that phone back to Dr. Bennett, immediately." Daniel hesitated. Arthur's voice hardened. "Now." Slowly, Daniel lowered the phone. He turned toward Alicia Bennett. His hand trembled slightly as he extended it. She accepted the phone without comment. "Yes, Arthur," she said. Daniel watched her. His world had begun tilting. Alicia listened quietly. Then she nodded. "I understand." Another pause. "Yes. I'll inform the captain." She ended the call. The cabin waited, every eye on her. Alicia turned to Captain Reynolds. "Arthur Pendleton has requested that Mr. Carter be removed from the aircraft immediately." Captain Reynolds nodded once. No hesitation, no drama. He stepped toward Daniel. "Sir," he said calmly, "please collect your belongings." Daniel stared at him. "You can't be serious." The pilot's voice remained level. "You are no longer welcome on this flight." Daniel's laugh came out hollow. "This is insane. I paid $15,000 for that seat." Captain Reynolds shrugged slightly. "You'll receive a refund." Daniel's voice rose. "You think this ends here?" "I will sue this airline into the ground." Captain Reynolds did not react. Instead, he gestured toward the front door. "Airport police are already on their way." The words hung in the air. Final. Unavoidable. Daniel Carter stood motionless in the aisle of first class. And for the first time in decades, he had absolutely no power left to stop what was coming next. Daniel Carter did not move. The command had been clear. The aisle in front of him was empty. His carry-on bag sat beneath seat 1A, the polished leather handle still facing outward like it had when he arrived. a small, arrogant detail from a life that had always gone exactly his way. But Daniel Carter did not reach for it. Instead, he stood there, breathing slowly, staring at Captain Reynolds as if waiting for the man to break into a smile and say the whole thing had been a misunderstanding. No one smiled. The cabin remained silent, except for the low electric hum coming from the aircraft systems. Mark Sullivan shifted his weight near the galley, but stayed where he was. Emily Harper clasped her hands together so tightly her knuckles turned white. Passengers watched. Phones recorded. Daniel's mind raced now, the machinery of ego scrambling to reconstruct authority from the ruins of the last 5 minutes. "This is absurd," he said finally. His voice sounded different now, still controlled but thinner. The confidence was there, but it had begun to leak. "You're throwing a paying customer off a flight because someone got offended?" Captain Reynolds didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped slightly closer, close enough that Daniel could see the faint lines at the corners of the pilot's eyes, the calm patience of a man who had dealt with frightened passengers, medical emergencies, and severe turbulence thousands of feet in the air. But there was no patience left for this. "Mr. Carter," Reynolds said quietly, "you are being removed because you have refused crew instructions and created a safety disturbance." Daniel laughed again, a short, bitter sound. "A safety disturbance?" I raised my voice. "That's what this is about?" He turned slightly, gesturing toward Alicia Bennett. "This woman is manipulating the situation because she didn't like something I said." Alicia did not respond. She had already returned to her seat. The folder of documents lay open on the tray table again. She had placed her glasses back on and resumed reading as if the argument unfolding 3 feet away had already become irrelevant. Daniel stared at her. "You think you've won something here?" he said sharply. Alicia turned a page. The soft sound of paper sliding across paper carried through the cabin. She didn't look up. Daniel's chest tightened. That silence hurt more than any argument. Captain Reynolds's voice cut through the tension. "Sir, pick up your bag." Daniel's head snapped back toward him. "No." The word landed hard. Several passengers inhaled quietly. Captain Reynolds didn't flinch. "I'm giving you a lawful instruction," he said. "You need to leave this aircraft." Daniel shook his head slowly. "I'm not leaving." Across the aisle, the man in seat 2A whispered to his companion, "This guy has no idea what's coming." The companion didn't answer. Everyone could feel the moment approaching now. The invisible line. Daniel Carter crossed it. Captain Reynolds reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small radio. "Ground control, this is Captain Reynolds at gate 32, he said calmly. "We need airport police at the jet bridge." Daniel's face flushed red. "You're calling the police? Are you serious?" The pilot clipped the radio back onto his belt. "Yes." Daniel spread his hands, almost laughing again. "This is insane. I've committed no crime." Mark Sullivan spoke quietly from behind him. "Interfering with a flight crew is a federal offense, sir." Daniel turned sharply. "Oh, please, spare me the legal lecture." But Mark didn't respond. Because at that exact moment, the door at the front of the aircraft opened. 2 uniformed Port Authority police officers stepped onto the jet bridge. They moved with the relaxed certainty of men who had walked this corridor hundreds of times. One was tall, broad-shouldered, early 40s. The other younger, stockier, eyes already scanning the cabin. Officer Grant stepped forward first. "Evening, Captain." Reynolds nodded. "Thanks for coming." Grant's gaze shifted toward Daniel Carter. "This him?" "Yes." Grant studied Daniel for a moment. The expensive suit, the tension in his posture, the expensive watch gleaming under the cabin lights. Men like Daniel were not uncommon here. But the officer had seen enough wealthy passengers dragged off flights to recognize the pattern. Pride first. Reality second. "Sir," Grant said evenly, "I'm going to need you to step off the aircraft." Daniel stared at him. "You're kidding." "No. I have a ticket." Grant nodded. "And the airline has revoked your travel privileges for this flight." Daniel turned toward Captain Reynolds again. "This is unbelievable." No one answered. The silence pressed in on him again. Grant's voice remained calm. "Sir, we can do this the easy way, or the hard way." Daniel's eyes moved slowly around the cabin. He saw the phones, the watching faces, the quiet judgment. His pride screamed at him not to move. But a deeper instinct had finally begun whispering something else. "You are losing." He bent down suddenly and yanked his carry-on bag from beneath the seat. The leather scraped across the carpet with a harsh sound. "Fine," he muttered. He stood upright again, gripping the handle tightly. "You'll all regret this." No one responded. He started down the aisle. Each step felt heavier than the last, the walk of a man leaving a room he once controlled. Passengers shifted in their seats as he passed. Some avoided his eyes, others didn't. The man who had been recording lowered his phone only slightly, keeping the lens trained on Daniel's face. Daniel reached the aircraft door. Officer Grant stepped aside to let him pass onto the jet bridge. The air outside the cabin felt colder. The sound of the airport rushed in. Distant announcements, rolling luggage, the echo of footsteps on concrete. Daniel stepped onto the jet bridge. Then he heard the voice behind him. "Mr. Carter." He turned. Alicia Bennett stood at the front of the cabin now. Not close, not confrontational, just standing there, watching. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "What?" Her voice was calm. "Next time you board an aircraft," she said quietly, "you might consider speaking to the person next to you, as if they're human." Daniel scoffed. "You destroyed my flight over a misunderstanding." Alicia shook her head once. "No." Her gaze held his. "You destroyed your flight." The jet bridge door closed behind him, and inside the cabin of Atlantic Crown Flight 882, the silence finally broke as passengers exhaled together. But Daniel Carter had no idea that the worst part of his night had not even begun yet. The jet bridge smelled faintly of metal and cold air from the night outside. Daniel Carter walked fast at first, the hard wheels of his carry-on rattling behind him across the ribbed floor. Officer Grant followed a step behind. The younger officer walked slightly ahead, guiding the direction without touching him yet. That was deliberate. People like Daniel reacted badly to hands. At the end of the jet bridge, the terminal lights looked harsher than usual. Fluorescent, flat. The hum of the airport was loud again now, announcements echoing through the ceiling speakers. suitcases rolling across polished tile, travelers moving past without knowing the small disaster that had just unfolded 30 feet away. Daniel stopped walking. The officers stopped with him. "This ends here," Daniel said. He turned toward them, jaw tight again, the old arrogance crawling back like muscle memory. "I'm not under arrest." Officer Grant nodded once. "That's correct." "Good." Daniel straightened his jacket. His breathing slowed as he felt a little control return. This was better. This was ground he understood. Lawyers, procedures, corporate leverage. "Then we're done," Daniel said. He reached for the handle of his bag. Grant didn't move. Not quite. Daniel froze. "What do you mean, not quite?" Grant's voice remained calm. "Airline security requested we escort you out of the terminal area." "That's ridiculous." The younger officer spoke this time. "Sir, you've been banned from the airline," Daniel scoffed. "From this flight," Grant shook his head. "From the airline." The words landed slowly. Daniel blinked. "That's impossible." Grant pulled a small tablet from his vest pocket. The screen lit up with the official airport incident log. Atlantic Crown. Corporate just filed the notice. Daniel stared at the screen. Banned passenger designation. Immediate enforcement. Lifetime restriction. Pending investigation. His mouth went dry. "This is a mistake." "No, sir," Grant said. Daniel's mind began moving again. Fast. Too fast. This was temporary. This would be reversed. CEOs did not destroy relationships with clients like him over a single misunderstanding. Arthur Pendleton would calm down once the situation cooled. Lawyers would fix the paperwork. "I want to make a call." Grant nodded. "You're free to use your phone." Daniel immediately pulled it from his pocket. His fingers moved quickly now, dialing numbers from muscle memory. First call. Jessica, his assistant. It rang. Voicemail. "Jessica, it's Daniel. Call me back immediately. There's been a situation on my flight. I need you to contact Arthur Pendleton's office and smooth this out." He ended the call. Second number. Preston Davis, Corporate Counsel. The phone rang twice, 3 times. Then the line clicked. "Daniel?" Relief washed through him instantly. "Preston." "Good. Listen carefully. I've been temporarily removed from an Atlantic Crown flight because of a ridiculous dispute with another passenger. I need you to contact their legal department immediately and remind them who they're dealing with." Silence. Not the silence of someone thinking, the silence of someone already knowing. Preston finally spoke. "Daniel, I was actually about to call you." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" "I just saw the video." Daniel's stomach tightened. "What video?" Preston hesitated. "The one currently trending on Twitter." The words hit him like a cold splash of water. "What are you talking about?" "Someone recorded the entire incident in the cabin." Daniel slowly turned his head, back toward the aircraft door. Inside the plane, a dozen phones had been pointed at him. Of course they had. Preston continued. "It's already past 2 million views." Daniel felt the floor shift under his feet. "That's impossible." "No," Preston said quietly. It's very possible. Daniel's chest began to tighten. This will disappear in a day. Daniel. Preston's voice dropped. You were yelling at the chair of the International Aviation Oversight Board. Daniel rubbed his temple. I didn't know who she was. That won't matter. Daniel's voice sharpened again. You're my lawyer. Fix it. Another pause. Then Preston exhaled slowly. Daniel. There's something else. What? The board of Carter Capital held an emergency call 20 minutes ago. Daniel blinked. What? They're invoking the moral conduct clause in your contract. For a moment, Daniel did not understand the sentence. Then it clicked. They can't do that. They already did. Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. That's illegal. No, Preston said. It's not. Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. What does that mean? It means you've been placed on administrative leave effective immediately. Daniel stared at the wall of the jet bridge. The fluorescent lights above him buzzed faintly. That's temporary. Preston did not answer. Daniel swallowed. Preston? The lawyer's voice came back quieter. The board is meeting again tomorrow morning. Daniel knew what that meant. They were preparing the paperwork. Removing him. Replacing him. All before sunrise. You're going to fight this, Daniel said. Preston hesitated again, then spoke with careful precision. I represent Carter Capital. Daniel's chest tightened. You represent me, not in this matter. The line went silent for 2 full seconds. Then Preston said the words Daniel Carter had never heard directed at him in his entire adult life. You need to find another attorney. The call ended. Daniel lowered the phone slowly. The airport noise suddenly sounded louder. Announcements, rolling luggage, distant voices. Officer Grant watched him carefully. You all right, sir? Daniel didn't answer, because in the space of 10 minutes, he had lost the flight, the airline, his lawyer, and possibly the company he built. And back inside the aircraft he had just left, Dr. Alicia Bennett had already returned to reading her documents, as if Daniel Carter had never existed at all. Daniel Carter remained standing at the edge of the terminal corridor long after the officers had stepped back. Passengers passed him on both sides, dragging suitcases, checking boarding passes, glancing briefly at the well-dressed man who seemed frozen in the middle of the walkway. The airport moved the way it always moved, loud, relentless, indifferent. Inside Daniel's chest, something had begun to collapse quietly. He lifted the phone again. Reflex. Control through connection. Another number. Cynthia. His wife. The line rang twice before she answered. Daniel? Her voice sounded calm but distant, like someone answering a call during a meeting. Cynthia, he said quickly. I need you to hear me before anything else you might see online. A pause. I've already seen it. Daniel closed his eyes. Listen, he said, forcing steadiness into his voice. The video is misleading. The woman on that plane manipulated the entire situation. She's some regulator who... Daniel. Her voice cut through him. Flat. Cold. Did you say those things? The question was simple, direct. Daniel hesitated. just for a fraction of a second. But Cynthia heard it. "Answer me," she said. Daniel exhaled. "I may have raised my voice. Did you call her those things?" The silence stretched. Daniel looked around the terminal. 2 teenagers walking past were staring at him. One of them held a phone up, clearly recording again. He turned away. "Daniel," Cynthia repeated. "Yes," he said quietly. The line went silent. Not the silence of anger. Something worse. Disappointment. "You humiliated yourself," she said finally. Daniel's jaw tightened. "I was defending myself. You attacked a woman because of the color of her skin on a plane full of witnesses. That's not what happened. 2 million people seem to think it is." Daniel pressed his hand to his forehead. "This will calm down." Cynthia didn't answer. Instead, she said something that made his stomach drop. "I've already spoken to the attorneys." "What attorneys?" "My attorneys." Daniel froze. "What are you talking about?" "I'm staying at my mother's tonight." The airport noise faded again. "You're overreacting," Daniel said. "No," she replied quietly. "You did that all by yourself." The line went dead. Daniel lowered the phone slowly. Somewhere overhead, an announcement echoed through the terminal. "Final boarding call for Flight 614 to Dallas." Passengers hurried past him without noticing the man who had once commanded entire boardrooms, now standing alone beside a vending machine. His phone buzzed again. A message. Unknown number. He opened it. A link. The headline loaded instantly. "Wall Street executive removed from flight after racist outburst." The video began playing automatically. There he was, standing in the aisle, face flushed, voice loud. Every word he had said replayed in crystal clear audio. "Get this woman out of my airspace. Affirmative action boarding. You people." The camera angle shifted. Now Alicia Bennett appeared in frame. Calm, controlled, watching him self-destruct. Below the video, the numbers ticked upward. 3 million views. 4 million. Daniel's hand trembled slightly as he closed the screen. Another notification appeared immediately. Breaking news. Carter Capital stock down 12% in early overseas trading. He stared at the number. 12% in 1 hour. His phone buzzed again. Another message, this one from a board member. Emergency meeting scheduled for 7 in the morning. Attendance mandatory. Daniel laughed softly. The sound was hollow. They wouldn't even let him defend himself before the markets opened. He began walking again without thinking. Through the terminal, past restaurants and glass storefronts, past travelers rushing toward gates. The airport lights reflected off the polished floor beneath his expensive shoes. A television mounted above the bar near Gate 30 flashed a news channel. Daniel stopped. On the screen behind the anchor was a still image. His face, mouth open mid-shout. Below it, the caption read, "Racist meltdown delays international flight." Several people at the bar noticed him standing there. One man nudged his friend. "Holy hell," he whispered. "That's him." The friend turned, eyes widening. Daniel felt the stare like heat against his skin. He turned away quickly. But it didn't matter. The story had already escaped the terminal. It was everywhere now. Back on the aircraft, the doors had closed. Captain Reynolds returned to the cockpit. The engines began their slow, rising whine as the aircraft prepared to push back from the gate. In seat 1B, Dr. Alicia Bennett remained exactly where she had been before the entire confrontation began. Her reading light glowed softly above the open folder. The passenger in seat 2A leaned slightly forward. "Dr. Bennett?" She looked up. "Yes?" He hesitated, then smiled. "I just wanted to say that was the calmest destruction of a man's career I've ever seen." A faint smile touched her lips. "I didn't destroy anything," she said quietly. The man tilted his head. "Are you sure?" Alicia Bennett closed the folder and looked out the window as the aircraft began to move away from the gate. "Yes," she said. "He did that himself." Daniel Carter walked out of the terminal doors and into the cold night air without remembering how he got there. The automatic glass doors slid shut behind him with a soft hiss. Outside the airport, the noise felt different. Taxi engines idled along the curb. A shuttle bus groaned as it pulled away. The smell of jet fuel lingered faintly in the damp air. Travelers loaded luggage into trunks, laughed, checked their watches, argued about directions. Life moved normally. Except Daniel Carter's did not. He stood there on the sidewalk for a long moment, one hand still gripping the handle of his carry-on bag, the other holding a phone that would not stop vibrating. Messages, calls, alerts. He looked down. 32 missed calls, 17 new messages, 3 voicemails, all in the last 15 minutes. He tapped the first voicemail. Jessica's voice came through, tight and fast. "Daniel, the video is everywhere. CNBC picked it up 10 minutes ago. I'm getting calls from reporters. The board is asking for a statement. Please call me back." The message ended. Daniel stared at the screen. Then another voicemail began automatically. This one from someone he recognized instantly. "Thomas Granger, lead investor. Daniel, what the hell is going on? I'm getting texts from London about some racist incident on a plane. Call me back immediately." Another beep, another message, another investor, another demand for explanation. Daniel ended the playback and shoved the phone into his pocket. His chest felt tight now. Not panic. Something slower. He began walking toward the parking structure across the street. His car was waiting there. Black Mercedes sedan. Reserved spot near the executive elevators. At least that part of his life still made sense. Inside the terminal behind him, the television coverage had already grown louder. Newsrooms loved a clean narrative. A powerful man, a viral video, a fall from grace. The formula practically wrote itself. Daniel reached the elevator inside the parking garage and pressed the button. The metal doors slid open. He stepped inside. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead as the elevator began climbing. 2nd floor. 3rd floor. 4th. The reflection in the steel panel in front of him looked unfamiliar. The same expensive suit. The same carefully styled silver hair. But the expression had changed. Less certainty. More calculation. The elevator doors opened onto the executive level. Daniel walked quickly toward his car. He unlocked it, threw his bag into the passenger seat, and slid behind the wheel. The familiar smell of leather and polished wood filled the cabin. For the first time in 30 minutes, he felt something resembling control again. Cars. Driving. movement. He started the engine. The phone buzzed again. He ignored it, backed out of the space, turned toward the exit ramp. As the car descended the spiral ramp, the phone buzzed again, then again, then again. Finally, he grabbed it from the console. Another message, from the Carter Capital Board. He opened it. Emergency shareholder statement pending. Media inquiries escalating. Please contact the board immediately. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. This is unbelievable, he muttered. At the bottom of the ramp, the exit gate lifted automatically. Daniel drove onto the airport access road. Traffic moved slowly under the glow of tall sodium lights. A rideshare driver honked at a taxi. A shuttle bus merged into the lane ahead of him. Normal life. He glanced at the phone again. Another alert. Carter Capital stock down 18% in overseas trading. 18. Daniel's jaw clenched. That kind of drop triggered automated sell orders. Panic spreads fast in markets like that. Tomorrow morning, when the New York Exchange opened, it would be worse. Much worse. He accelerated slightly, merging onto the highway. The airport lights faded behind him. The city skyline glowed faintly ahead in the distance. For years, that skyline had been his scoreboard. Every building, every deal, every merger. Proof that men like Daniel Carter shaped the world. His phone rang again. This time, the caller ID read something different. Private number. Daniel hesitated, then answered. Yes. The voice on the other end was calm, controlled. Mr. Carter. Daniel's grip tightened. He recognized the voice instantly. Arthur Pendleton, CEO of Atlantic Crown Airlines. Daniel forced his voice steady. Arthur, I assume you've seen the video by now. Yes. A pause. Arthur continued. I want to be very clear about something. Daniel said nothing. You are permanently banned from Atlantic Crown flights, effective immediately. Daniel exhaled sharply. That's unnecessary. Arthur ignored the comment. Our legal department is reviewing the incident under federal aviation interference statutes. Daniel's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. You're threatening criminal charges. I'm explaining consequences. The highway stretched ahead in dark lines of asphalt. Daniel drove in silence for a moment, then said quietly, This will pass. Arthur's voice did not change. No. Another pause. Then the CEO added one final sentence. You attacked the wrong person. The line went dead. Daniel stared at the dark road ahead, and for the first time that night, the full weight of the situation began pressing down on him. Because everything he had built over 25 years was now collapsing faster than he could drive away from it. And somewhere above the Atlantic Ocean, Atlantic Crown Flight 882 was already climbing through 20,000 feet. Inside the quiet first-class cabin, Dr. Alicia Bennett closed her folder, turned off the reading light, and looked out at the endless black horizon beyond the window. To her, the entire incident was already over. To Daniel Carter, it was only the beginning. The holding room at Port Authority Police Headquarters did not look like the kind of place where powerful men made phone calls. The walls were dull grey cinder block. A metal bench was bolted to the floor. The fluorescent light overhead flickered every few seconds with a faint buzzing sound that gnawed at the nerves. Daniel Carter sat on the bench with his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. 2 hours earlier, he had been driving toward Manhattan, telling himself the situation was still manageable. Then the police cruiser lights had appeared behind him, not flashing aggressively, just steady red and blue reflections rolling across the rear-view mirror. He had pulled over. An officer had approached the window. "Mr. Carter?" The recognition had been immediate. The explanation had followed. Atlantic Crown had filed a formal complaint citing federal interference with flight crew operations and threatening behavior toward passengers. Under aviation law, the report triggered mandatory questioning. Daniel had tried to argue, tried to call lawyers, tried to invoke connections. None of it mattered once the paperwork started moving. Now he sat alone in a room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale air. Across from him, a metal table held a single plastic cup of water, untouched. The door opened. A woman stepped inside. Early 40s, dark suit, no-nonsense posture. She carried a thin tablet under one arm. "Mr. Carter." Her voice was calm. Daniel looked up slowly. "Yes. I'm Special Agent Laura Kim, Joint Aviation Task Force." Daniel leaned back slightly. "I'm not a criminal." Agent Kim didn't react. She sat down across from him and placed the tablet on the table. "No one said you were. Then why am I here?" Kim tapped the tablet. The screen lit up. A paused video frame appeared. Daniel Carter, standing in the aisle of the aircraft, finger pointed, face twisted in anger. Kim slid the tablet toward him. "Because of this." Daniel stared at the frozen image of himself. He looked smaller on the screen than he remembered feeling in the moment. Almost frantic. "You're investigating a viral video now?" he said. Kim folded her hands. "We're investigating a passenger who refused crew instructions and created a disturbance on an international flight." Daniel shook his head. "This is ridiculous." Kim tilted the screen slightly. The video began playing. His voice filled the small room. "Get her out of my airspace. Affirmative action boarding. You people." The words sounded uglier in the quiet interrogation room than they had in the noise of the airplane cabin. Daniel looked away. Kim paused the video. "This has 8 million views now." Daniel didn't answer. Kim continued. "The FAA opened a formal review 30 minutes ago." Daniel's head snapped up. "What?" "They take flight crew interference seriously. I didn't interfere with anything." Kim leaned slightly forward. "You refused direct instructions from a captain preparing for departure." Daniel felt heat rising in his chest again. That pilot overreacted. Kim's expression didn't change. "You threatened his authority in front of a full cabin." Daniel laughed bitterly. "Threatened his authority? You told him you could have his license revoked." The words hung in the air. Daniel remembered saying them. In the moment, they had felt powerful. Now they sounded childish. Kim continued calmly. "Then you directed racially discriminatory language at another passenger." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I didn't know who she was." Kim nodded slowly. "That's not the point." She tapped the tablet again. Another screen appeared. A stock market chart. Carter Capital Group. The line dropped sharply downward. Daniel leaned forward despite himself. How far? Kim read the number. 26%. Daniel's stomach dropped. That's impossible. The Asian markets reacted quickly. Daniel rubbed his face. That will recover. Kim didn't argue. Instead, she opened another tab. This is a statement from the California Public Pension Fund. Daniel read silently. They were suspending investments with Carter Capital, pending leadership review. Another tab. The Qatar Sovereign Wealth Fund. Public condemnation. Another tab. Breaking news headline. Carter Capital Board schedules emergency removal vote. Daniel's breathing slowed. The reality was beginning to sink in now. This was bigger than embarrassment, bigger than social media outrage. The markets had smelled blood. Kim watched him carefully. "Bad night," she said quietly. Daniel looked up. "You think this is funny?" "No." She closed the tablet. "I think it's predictable." Daniel stared at her. Men who believe rules don't apply to them eventually discover they do. Daniel leaned back against the wall again. The cold cinder block pressed against his shoulders. For the first time that night, his voice sounded tired. "What happens now?" Kim stood. "You'll be released tonight." Daniel blinked. "That's it?" "For now." She picked up the tablet. "But the FAA investigation continues." Daniel exhaled slowly. He had expected something worse. Kim paused at the door. "One more thing." Daniel looked up. "The passenger you harassed." He stiffened. "What about her?" Kim studied him for a moment. "Do you know who she actually is?" Daniel hesitated. "The airline regulator." Kim shook her head slightly. "Chairwoman of the International Aviation Oversight Board." Daniel swallowed. "Yes." Kim opened the door. "Then you already know how much trouble you're in." The door closed behind her. Daniel Carter sat alone again in the grey room, and for the first time since boarding the plane that evening, the man who had built an empire on intimidation and certainty had nothing left to say. 6 months later, the airport looked exactly the same. Bright glass walls, endless rows of seats, the steady echo of rolling suitcases and distant boarding calls. Jets gliding across the runway outside the tall windows like enormous silver birds. But the man pushing a grey cleaning cart through Terminal B no longer looked anything like Daniel Carter. The uniform hung loose on his shoulders, the navy fabric faded from constant washing. A plastic badge clipped to his chest read, simply, Rick. The name had been shortened on purpose by the contractor that hired him. Simpler for payroll. Simpler for people who preferred not to remember what he used to be. Rick pushed the cart slowly across the polished floor, the wheels squeaking every few feet. In his hand was a mop handle. The smell of industrial cleaner clung to the air around him. 6 months earlier, he had stood inside an airplane cabin, wearing a $10,000 suit and demanding respect from strangers. Now he wiped spilled soda off airport tile for $14 an hour. Life had a strange sense of balance. Rick. The voice came from behind him. He turned. A young supervisor in a bright yellow vest waved from the corridor. "Got a spill near Gate 12. Blue slushy. Looks like a crime scene." Rick nodded. "On it." His voice sounded rougher these days. He turned the cart and started walking. As he passed the television screens mounted above the gate lounge, a familiar face appeared on the news channel. Dr. Alicia Bennett. She stood behind a podium at an international conference in Tokyo. Cameras flashed as she spoke about new aviation safety standards. The caption beneath the screen read, "Global Aviation Chief announces new international oversight program." Rick stopped walking. For a moment, he just stared. Her posture was the same as it had been on the airplane. Calm, controlled, unshakable. The world treated her differently now, too. Respectfully. The way powerful people were treated when their authority came from competence instead of money. A passenger sitting nearby glanced at the screen. "That woman's everywhere lately," he said to his wife. "Runs the whole aviation board now." Rick lowered his eyes and kept walking. He had watched that video of himself many times during the first weeks after the incident. The meltdown, the shouting, the way his face twisted with anger while she remained completely calm. The internet had given him a new name. Racist Rick. The nickname had spread quickly. The board of Carter Capital had fired him the next morning. Investors pulled funding. His accounts were frozen during the investigations into tax irregularities that surfaced once regulators started examining his private jet records. The divorce papers arrived 3 days later. The penthouse had been sold, the Mercedes repossessed. The empire he built over 25 years collapsed in less than 48 hours. Rick reached gate 12 and parked the cart. A bright blue puddle of melted slushy spread across the floor like spilled paint. He dipped the mop into the bucket. Ring. Swipe. The rhythm was mechanical now. Across the terminal, a group of passengers suddenly moved aside as security officers walked past. Behind them, a small group of officials entered the VIP corridor. Rick glanced up without thinking, then froze. Dr. Alicia Bennett walked through the terminal, surrounded by aides and airport security. She looked exactly the same. Elegant cream suit, confident stride. People stepped aside automatically as she passed. Rick lowered his head quickly and kept mopping. "Please just walk past. Please don't notice me." The group moved closer. 5 yards. 3. Then something unexpected happened. They stopped. One of Alicia's aides had dropped a tablet stylus near the corridor entrance. While the aide bent to pick it up, Alicia waited. Her gaze drifted across the terminal. It landed on Rick. For a moment, neither of them moved. Rick slowly lifted his head. Their eyes met. 6 months of consequences stood between them. Rick expected anger, disgust, maybe even recognition mixed with satisfaction. Instead, Alicia simply looked at him the same way she had looked at him on the airplane. Calm, detached, like a scientist observing a distant phenomenon. There was no triumph in her expression, no revenge, just acknowledgement. Then the aide stood up again. "Ready, Doctor?" Alicia nodded. "Thank you." She turned away and continued walking down the corridor toward the waiting aircraft. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor. Within seconds, the security team and aides followed, disappearing behind the restricted door. Rick stood there, holding the mop. The blue, slushy puddle had spread wider while he wasn't looking. He bent down and resumed cleaning. Ring, swipe, ring, swipe. The television above the gate switched channels again. Another news program replayed the old airplane video for context during the conference coverage. Rick's own face appeared on the screen, angry, entitled, unrecognizable compared to the quiet janitor standing beneath the television now. He watched it for a moment, then looked away. Sometimes karma doesn't arrive slowly. Sometimes it lands all at once. And sometimes the person you try to humiliate turns out to be the one person in the world whose power can dismantle your entire life. Rick finished cleaning the floor and pushed the cart toward the next corridor. The airport lights reflected off the polished tiles as another plane roared into the sky outside the window. High above the clouds, people in first class sipped champagne and read reports in peace. Down on the ground, Rick kept walking, disappearing into the endless movement of the terminal. Because the real lesson had never been about power. It had been about respect. Treat people with dignity, not because of who they might be, but because of who you choose to be. And if this story made you think for even a moment, take a second to support the channel. Tap like, subscribe for more stories like this, and drop 3 words in the comments. Respect earns everything.